Pre-orders are live for Nintendo Switch 2, and it's very evident to everyone that this thing is in high demand, that people are like really excited for it. And right now, the cope and seed is that well, Nintendo isn't handling the pre-order period well. Again, like all the copes and seeds up to this point, it doesn't hold any water. It's not going to be relevant. Honestly, like I don't even think people will even remember that it's a thing. That RGT85 is complaining about the fact that he couldn't order a Nintendo Switch 2 right at midnight. Like no one cares. Like just go out to retail and or don't get it day one. You know, like that's another thing too that I've thought about is that you don't have to get this thing day one, you know? So to me, I think this is a very strong indication of just how well the console is doing, how popular it's been, and we're really starting to get real numbers here. Like we're getting hard confirmation that it will outperform the Switch, that it will be in high demand, that it will outsell the PS2, that this thing is going to be a huge success story. And it is time we talk about what that really means for the industry because everybody wanted to see this thing fail. You know, that's the reality of this. Like when you look at what the third parties are doing with their stupid game code thing and just the way they're acting right now and when you see how game journals have tried to spin this thing, everybody was really hoping this would be a failed Nintendo console. Like, never mind the fact that Nintendo has never had a failed console in its entire history because they constantly make profit with no debt. Never mind the fact that it has no major competitors, that nobody else has touched them, that Sony completely failed to drive them out of the console industry like they wanted. Let's ignore all of that and just pretend that after the momentum of the Switch, that everybody would just not be interested in the Switch 2. Let's just pretend that there would be no enthusiasm for this thing at all when it launches on June 5th. It's who really thought this would ever be a thing? Is kind of my question about this. And I do think it does need to be addressed, and this has become very apparent to me, after spending some time with other people talking about Switch 2. The online discourse about Nintendo consoles is completely wrong. Okay, I've been saying this for a long time, right? I've been a big advocate for the idea that the online gaming community is completely out of touch with reality and they have no idea what they're talking about. It's actually one of the driving forces behind my channel, actually. But I've been taken aback, honestly, at just how much enthusiasm there is for Nintendo Switch 2 over the past couple of weeks. Because initially, I started a new job and I wasn't out and about all that much for the first couple of weeks after the trailer. So it was I didn't realize this immediately, but interacting with other people, other gamers, people who are following this stuff, who it's very clear to me that not only is the Nintendo Switch 2 going to be successful, not only are people hyped for it, more and more people are starting to question the legitimacy of the official history of Nintendo hardware. And what does that mean? What do I mean by that? They are questioning the narrative about failed Nintendo hardware like the GameCube. Because I went through this experience too, where I grew up being told that the GameCube was lame, and the PS2 and Xbox were way superior, that the Wii was lame, right? I was screamed at for liking Pokemon and playing Nintendo games. It was something that you were hated for in the 2000s, right? People like to pretend that did not happen, right? People like to pretend it's just it wasn't a thing, but it absolutely was true. like more and more, I'm seeing like people like speak out against the fact that that was 100% ridiculous because people are like noticing, like the noticing has begun. Like what it, that GameCube games have retained their value way more than the PS2 and Xbox. It's common knowledge that like Super Smash Bros. Melee is an absolute classic, but that's also extending to a lot of other major GameCube games that have never really been released. Games like Wind Waker, Metroid Prime, Super Mario Sunshine have all had like really well received like re-releases uh, in the past decade. And now we're going into Nintendo Switch 2 and getting like the NSO stuff. We're seeing a lot of people like be really excited for this. Like this very well may be the turning point for Nintendo Switch Online, where people will have to be forced to acknowledge it as a good service because like GameCube games, because they're so expensive and so hard to find, um, it'll just be quicker and easier to just get all this stuff through the subscription service. And that's my thing, going into this, looking at like what Nintendo was doing, looking at just how many people are like excited for this stuff. If people are reevaluating the GameCube and the Wii, like how exactly are people going to going to look back on the original Switch? This isn't going to be like the PS2 where like people act like, oh, it sold 150 million units, and yet don't remember any games on it, don't play any games on it today, don't look back on it fondly or think about it at all. Like the PS2 did not leave a lasting impression on anyone outside of this like vague idea that it sold the best. Uh, like the reality is that like the Wii was more successful, that the GameCube was more successful, that the DS is more successful, that the Wii U is more successful because people actually play the games. People actually remember the games. Actually, the Wii U is a really interesting situation because right now it's the poster boy for like failed Nintendo platforms, right? But the Wii U kind of proves that it is impossible for Nintendo hardware to fail, right? Because this thing came out, was a major innovator, had introduced all these great new games, was in a lot of ways kind of a swan song for Iwata's era at Nintendo. A phenomenal leader and just great developer. We miss him every day. The Wii U, huge success story. Introduced all these great games, great developers, um, and what happens? A lot of these games get re-released on the Switch, and they do really, really well. 3D World, Breath of the Wild is a Wii U port. Like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe did 60 million units, right? Like this should more than anything, demonstrate how it's basically impossible for a Nintendo console to fail, right? Because traditionally, what happened is that journos would come out and try and tell you that, like, oh, there's nothing I want to play. And then they would just ignore everything that came out. With the Switch 2, it's getting harder and harder to do that because Nintendo demonstrates that better than the other games, that they have this huge back catalog of games to fall back on. It's easily accessible on Switch 2. There's no reason to like pirate these games on PC. They're just right there, right? Like the traditional like methodology of like hating Nintendo hardware has just gone completely tits up. And it's it's becoming harder and harder to gaslight people into thinking this hardware is going to be disappointing or underwhelming or anything. Like anybody who said that like the Switch 2 was going to fail because of the price point because of the launch window games, because of like what Nintendo was doing it with it, is completely and utterly delusional. And we do need to address this more going forward and really start talking about just how successful Nintendo actually is. Because there is no denying that the company is not going anywhere.